Hi there, I'm Reggie Aki. Welcome to ABC7 Next Gen Now, a roundtable conversation in the effort to center the voices of the next generation of queer and trans leaders. We are here to listen and learn and talk about queer and trans representation here in the Bay Area. Arya Saeed is a founder and executive director of Compton's Transgender Cultural District in San Francisco. It is the first legally recognized trans district in the world. Samia Blaza-Wills, Director of API Equality, Northern California. APIENC is led primarily by young, trans, and non-binary folks for the entire QTAPI community. Michael Nguyen, Board Chair of the GLBTQ+ Asian Pacific Alliance, formerly the Gay Asian Pacific Alliance. GAPA envisions a powerful QTAPI community that is seen, heard, and celebrated. And Yaqub Elmi, a queer non-binary activist and recent grad of University of San Francisco, congrats, as well as our own ABC7 Next Gen Council contributor. Welcome to you all. And I should say happy Pride to all of you as well. And that's why we're here. Okay. Yes. So to get started, because, you know, who knows who we're talking to out there in the world today, let's talk about some terminology, just so that everybody feels comfortable and we're all kind of on the same page, because if we don't know the words to use, then it's hard to talk, right? So by now, everybody pretty much knows LGBTQ+. That's kind of the general umbrella that we use for the community. However, it may be possible that some people don't know some of the other terms that we're using these days. So we can start with cisgender. So who wants to help me explain what cisgender means to our audience today?
I'll go, just because I identify as a cis gay male. That means I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth. And that's what cisgender usually means. And so, I mean, I think most folks hear that term and they might feel kind of, you know, I don't understand what this means, but it just means that you identify with the gender assigned at birth.
Easy enough. Arya, let's talk about when people say that they are a non-binary. What do they mean by that?
Like Michael was saying, cisgender is a medical terminology, as well as transgender, right? For an experience of whether you sort of identify in alignment with your sex assigned at birth, and so on. And so in our world currently, in our society, we have what's called the gender binary. And so that is determined in that there is both male and female, and then gender, right? So sex and then gender being man and woman. And so a non-binary individual is someone who identifies outside of that context of a binary system in terms of gender. And so that person could be gender nonconforming. They could identify as both. They could identify as neither. And so it is a range of experience.
Help me to understand what it means when people are putting their pronouns on their Zoom or in their email signatures. Why do people do that?
So as of recently, people are starting to recognize gender discourse. We're starting to exit the binary world that Arya mentioned earlier of folks just identifying as purely men with he, him pronouns or women with she, her pronouns. And so when people put up their pronouns, they're just essentially identifying the gender that they identify with. So of course, men use he, him, women use he, she, her. People who identify as gender non-conforming or non-binary may use they, them, she, her. I've even heard folks use just their name as a pronoun. So people are now recognizing that the binary is not our only existence.
Very good.
Oh, can I add to that?
Please do.
It's also a way to normalize the experiences of transgender non-binary folks with identification, right? And so there is a world currently where cisgender people are more privileged and that they do not have to they're not obligated to define how they identify in terms of gender. And so the culture in which, you know, having folks disclose in meetings or put in their email signature, you know, she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs, he, him, his, is really also rooted in normalizing sort of sharing your identity. in this particular way, so that trans people and non-binary folk, the onus is not on us to always sort of out ourselves to be respected when engaging with other people.
Yeah, the way that I put it, and I don't know if this is a good way to put it, but I just use this and maybe it'll be helpful for some folks who may not understand. If you are going to a party and you didn't necessarily know anyone there, this is basically saying, let's all wear name tags. Because not everybody knows everyone's name. Now, there might be some people that everybody knows their name, and that's fine. But by that everybody knows their name, putting on a name tag, it makes everyone else feel more comfortable because they're not standing out. They're not necessarily, the new person in the group. So if everybody's doing the same thing, then it's not odd that a few people are wearing the name tag. Everybody's doing it. And it's just easy enough to put on your email or put in the Zoom. If it makes people more comfortable, why not? Does that work? Does that analogy work?
Exactly. And it doesn't other people, right?
Yeah.
So typically we've seen in the world that when you are queer or when you are trans or when you are non-binary, there's a way that you are constantly othered. And then the onus is on you to sort of educate the world around you on how to respect you. And this is just one step towards making sure that everyone is equally respected and also sort of equally obligated to come out, if you will.
Got it. Sammy, talk to me about this, because when I was doing the introductions for all four of you, there were a lot of letters. it was alphabet soup up in here. And I think for some people, it could be a bit of an obstacle when they're trying to understand this community or be part of this community to figure things out. So can you talk to me a little bit about how maybe people who see it as an obstacle can perhaps see it otherwise?
There are a lot of terms to learn. There are a lot of experiences to understand. And I think the most important thing is coming at all of this learning with a genuine curiosity and desire to always learn and be better. None of us are going to get it right all the time. Even myself as a trans and non-binary queer person, I'm always learning new things. Language evolves, identities change, the way people refer to themselves or one another is gonna evolve over time. And I think as long as people have a commitment to caring for one another and centering another person's humanity, not just who they think they are or who they misunderstand someone else to be, that is the core of what we're trying to do with one another, center each other's humanity so that our identities are not a precursor to violence or misunderstanding. And so I would just encourage folks to continue to be curious, to practice, if they are cisgender, to practice with other cisgender people how to get things like pronouns right, to have candid conversations with other people who share the same privileges as they do, to unpack the feelings that might come up when they feel like they've made a mistake or they don't understand, to do their own internal work, to realize that everyone has a gender, everyone has pronouns. Like, it's not just trans and non-binary people that have a gender. We literally all have a gender, and we can all interrogate that. We can all think about it. So I think for folks who are coming into this and feeling overwhelmed, I would say that's cool. Like, up your resilience of being overwhelmed, because it's gonna take all of us to feel okay being challenged enough to then challenge the systems that we need to overturn to actually promote safety and humanity.
I could not have said that better, Sammy. That was amazing. And I should also add that as a gay old, some of these things are new to me too. I am constantly learning. Prior to this discussion, my co-anchors in the morning, we were reviewing your bios. I was talking about some of the issues we were going to be describing today, and we were all learning, and we all felt like that we're pretty educated, smart individuals. Some of us part of the LGBTQ community, but we're still trying to get some of this too, because y'all in this next generation are way ahead of us. Okay, so speaking of that, let's talk to Michael about what this Pride Month means to you.
Yeah, for me, Pride is a moment to really reflect on the achievements that we have won as a community, and then also really recognize that there's still some struggles left. I mean, so some achievements, marriage equality. This is when the Oberfell case came down. This is when, I mean, we can recognize the importance of Bostock and discrimination based on sex that has now affected the Title IX decision with Department of Education. So there's so many wins out there, but there's so many struggles still. There's so many laws and state legislators that trying to basically attack our trans kids. And it's to me it's senseless, and as a lawyer, I'm looking at Bostock and I'm like, well, clearly it applies to Title IX. So I'm glad that our education secretary said that very clearly, but it's still up to the state legislatures to knock down these horrible transphobic laws, and it's up to our lawyers in our LGBTQ community to fight against that. So for me, it's a matter of really just reflection on those wins and the upcoming struggles, and then also a time to reconnect and recommit to the cause and to creating more spaces for a just future.
Michael, I'm glad you brought up some of the legal fights that are now in process. And Arya, as you've been watching this over the past year, it is unprecedented. We have never seen this kind of impact sent towards the trans community from state legislatures. And I'm wondering why you think that is. What is this really about, this attack on trans rights?
Pride is actually such a very tricky holiday for me, or holiday season that we celebrate, right?
We do take the month.
For queer and trans folks, because as a Black trans woman, I think I'm always struggling with what I am celebrating at this moment. And so you're absolutely right. We have seen more harmful rhetoric, over 200 anti-trans legislation pieces across the country. We've seen sort of last year was the highest amount of murders against Black trans women in particular. And then globally, right, trans people are receiving the brunt of oppression in countries around the world. And so it fascinates me because we are such a tiny population. And, I'm always telling my team at the Transgender District, let's just also celebrate that we are that powerful, that people will design agendas and strategies around us when, in theory, we're actually defenseless. We make up less than 1% of the American population, trans people, right? Transgender, non-binary people. And yet there is so much fixation on trans people and their bodies. And I think it's interesting to watch because, we're talking about, in some instances, transgender children and their ability to sort of play sports and be in, traditional sort of education settings and be their authentic selves, but also be accepted by their peers. And yet people online on the internet are talking about kids as genitalia. Like, that's not crazy, right? There's this weird, bizarre thing where as soon as the topic transgender comes up, they have no boundaries, and they will police trans people and non-binary folk on our bodies and our experiences, when in reality, it's no one's business. And I think most trans people are doing good if they're just able to live their lives. And so I think we've seen this time and time again in America with different elements like the welfare queen and these sort of large level agendas that are not exactly rooted in truth. And it's sort of like always perpetuating like the boogeyman upstairs, or don't look under the bed, right? Like there's a common enemy that we all share. In reality, most trans people are not harming anyone. We are just trying to live our lives. And these crazy people keep creating rhetoric that is false, keep creating social issues that are not truly real, like policing people and using the restrooms. People have been self-managing that for centuries. Trans people, like, that's also another thing. Trans people did not fall out of the sky in 2007. I don't care what other people say, right? We didn't just like wound up here. Oh, this is a new thing in the culture. No, what we do have now as of late is we have more agency. Trans people have sort of been wallpapered in TV and in comedy. We've been punchlines. We've been, you know, the scapegoat of a joke, the comic relief for hundreds of years, essentially, before television and film. You know, culturally, trans people have always sort of been marginalized. And we know this, we've seen this in history. I think what's different now is you see so many more trans voices and so much more that we're not a monolith of experiences, but we do share a struggle. And I think it's important for people to realize that now we were silent before. We were silenced, we were silent. We were not allowed to sort of articulate our experiences. And now we have the agency to do that. And that's what makes this time now so different. And so for, you know, audiences and viewers who are like, oh, I'm still learning about all this stuff and, you know, what have you, like, of course, you know, take your time in learning, but also know that we have authentically existed since the dawn of time. Yep. The transgender and non-binary experience is a part of the human condition. And the negative rhetoric is adversely impacting trans people in their everyday lives simply because of an agenda.
Thank you, Ari. I want to get Jakub into this conversation because Ari was just talking about the interesting position that she is in, you know, as a trans woman, and how do you celebrate that during Pride when there's a lot of conflicting messages that are going on there. As the non-binary population celebrates Pride, what does that mean, and do you feel fully invited to that celebration?
And I think with this Pride specifically, especially after we've, you know, so far survived this pandemic, folks are starting to acknowledge the existence and also struggle that trans and non-binary people see, not only in representation, but in the workplace, on media, on a lot of other spaces. So as like Michael was putting earlier, like, at least at this point for me, Pride is essentially just kind of, Pride season specifically, is essentially just a moment of reflection and a moment to understand, like, we've come far, but we are still far from the solution. We're just now creating a lot more discourse. And folks need to consistently keep on challenging themselves. I mean, I still feel, you know, a huge exhaustion at the end of the day of like correcting people when I am misgendered or my pronouns are used incorrectly. But at the end of the day, I'm also still very happy that I'm coming more into myself, and folks are able to do that comfortably in their workspaces through their pronouns.
So it makes an interesting point, Sammy, talking about not just how those outside of the LGBTQ plus community are affecting us, but how the community itself is divided sometimes. And there has been, I think, a positive change, at least in my lifetime, again, speaking as an old gay, where I think there was a real time in my younger life where there was a pushback against anyone that wasn't just gay or lesbian being part of this tent. And I hope, and I want to gauge what you think about that we have progressed, but I'm sure there's a lot more to be done.
There's definitely been so much progress in terms of how trans and non-binary people are welcomed into the LGBTQ community. And like, there's a long way to go. I think as Aria was speaking to, so often people on the margins get scapegoated if they do not fit the agenda of whatever group is dominant. And margins and centers aren't something that just are created in our broad so-called US society. They're also created in smaller groups and smaller cultures. And so in the broad LGBTQ community, trans and non-binary people have been put on the margins and have been told that they are not good enough time and time again for many, many decades. I think, unfortunately, as fights for lesbian and gay rights have progressed, sometimes trans and non-binary people have been left kind of on the margins or left to the side because they haven't fit into the picture of what will make lesbian and gay rights possible. I think being trans and being non-binary is so expansive to people's imaginations that it's uncomfortable, you know, to like assert that we can be something different than people have been told their entire lives, that you can either be assigned male or female. And we come out here and we're like, no, like we can actually be a beautiful bunch of other things, and all of those things are valid and right. That has been so challenging for folks that when not convenient, trans and non-binary people are left to the wayside. And I think that it's really up to everybody in the LGBTQ community to challenge that and to say, if trans and non-binary people are not centered, if they are not the ones leading, our justice that we're fighting for is not truly going to be for all of us. And I think it's really important that we look at that across the LGBTQ community and intersectionally, right? It's like no mistake that Black and brown trans women are targets of violence at much higher rates than other groups within this vast umbrella. That Asian and Pacific Islander trans people have really different experiences when it comes to accessing mental health care, employment discrimination, housing, economic opportunity than our cisgender, queer, Asian and Pacific Islander community, right? And so even though to the outside world or to even people inside, LGBTQ can seem so specific and so tight, we have to understand the different experiences and intersections within that, so that as we're advocating, as we're celebrating, as we're organizing, we're never replicating the mistakes of the past and leaving people behind.
And on that note, a lot of those discussions are happening where the sometimes hot, steaming pile of garbage known as social media. Which occasionally can be good as well. And one good person, in my opinion, that I follow, and maybe some of you know this person as well in San Francisco, is Chase Anderson. And so Chase Anderson, as I was scrolling last night, writes, normalize asking LGBTQ plus and other minoritized youth about their body image and how they view themselves. They are inundated with messages that they are not the right type of look from an early age, and don't speak about it unless you ask. And I felt that down to my bones. And I'm wondering if anyone else can relate to that message, even, and maybe even especially during Pride season, when our feeds are full of a lot of hots in Speedos at the pool.
I'll jump in here because
Come through, Michael.
As a fat femme Asian, where there's no fats, no femmes, no Asians,
Yes.
like since growing up and the grinders and the gay.coms, I'm also a geriatric millennial.
Thank
so
you.
I feel it.
Thank you. I see you.
I see you. Yes, and I would just say social media is a blessing and a curse. You know, it's been a way to connect, a new way for a whole new generation to connect and see each other, see representations of each other, but then also a lot of bullying. Like, I can't even imagine growing up gay and with all this stuff, you know, like all these social media things, you know, and just the pressures of it all. So I would say use it in moderation, but really value the connections you can make, and then like add on to those and strengthen those through in real life connection. So, but as far as the representation of like the hot bodies, here's the thing. It's a journey for all of us to love ourselves and to really see ourselves. And during this pandemic, you know, as Arya was saying, you really kind of get a sense of who you are, and this is me, this is my body right now, this is where I am. And so I think the special power that LGBTQ people have is that we, in part of coming out, is that we really see ourselves, our true selves, very clearly. And so I would say, though, in the gay community, it is, you know, it's all about the abs. It's all about the cis white gay male with the Abercrombie. I mean, I grew up with that. the thing that we need to fight back and create create images and in representation that really reflect reality. And so I think social media can be part of that conversation, and our organizations, like for example, I helped create a Q-Tappy week in the month of May of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, because I thought that, hey, Q-Tappy representation isn't really seen. We have these beautiful organizations.
And Michael, let's define it real quick, because I think this is new for a lot of people. Q-Tappy is?
Q-Tappy is queer, transgender, Asian, and Pacific Islanders. Or, you know, and we can also change those letters around. T-Cappy is another way of saying it, to emphasize trans folks. But, you know, I use Q-Tappy, and basically we had a Q-Tappy week formally recognizing the contributions of queer and transgender and Asian and Pacific Islanders in the city of San Francisco. That was the first time ever in the United States, thanks to Supervisor Mandelman and a unanimous consent of the whole Board of Supervisors. So that was earlier this year. We want to recognize the work of amazing organizations like APINC, API Equality Northern California, and SAMI, and all the folks there. And so the other organizations that we have here in the Bay Area, like being Asian or Pacific Islander means you're kind of invisible. Talking about like us, and so then to be queer or trans in the API community, it's like a minority within a minority, and so you're sort of like, do I exist? You know, like,
yeah.
Am I even here? You know, like, and so I think, you know, that's why we really needed to have that visibility week, and I hope that it translates nationwide.
I wanted to add to that, Michael, because, you know, as a fellow, you know, plus size fat person, I think there is a way that there is still, even with the growth and body positivity movement and us, you know, seeing those examples manifested on social media, I think social media has been a great place for us to see more variance. And that has then influenced media to actually sort of be forced to reflect back the culture. There's always this, you know, who came first, chicken or the egg? Like, does the media inform the world, or does the world inform the media? You know, fashion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think, you know, we're also holding our intersectional experiences too. So, you know, not only am I trans, I'm also a Black, brown-skinned, plus-size woman. And very rarely in the culture, especially in the Western world, it's like almost sort of communicated to you that when you are sort of fat and Black and a woman, that you are the opposite of beauty, right? And we even see this with, you know, I hate saying this because I love the ladies, and but the cast of Pose.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, I mean, even with trans visibility, we also have to remember that there is still sort of cis heteronormativity, and that's partly because of who is producing, who is writing, who is whatever, right? And so, you know, everyone is skinny and light-skinned and small and like passing, you know, sort of as cis, as a cisgender person, and very rarely do you get to, even in a Janet Mock, Laverne Cox world, get to see, you know, fat Black trans women or dark-skinned women. And this is something I'm holding both as a trans woman, but also just as a woman, period, and a Black woman, where you don't get to see yourself represented. Like, as soon as Lizzo started becoming more popular, people would stop me on the street and be like, oh, you kind of look like Lizzo. And I'm like, girl, we do not all look the same.
Not that.
I'm sorry.
That's not it. But you made so many good points there, Aria, and that is not to disparage shows like Pose, because wow, I mean, to have all of those trans actors on a show together telling a really beautiful story, love it. But you make a really good point about how it's still Hollywood. You know, Hollywood still has an image that it protects. And so that goes. So let's transition talking about that, because, you know, what we see on TV and what we read in our books, what is served to us in gay media even, does influence the culture. And Sammy, I'm curious what your sort of critique is of that in the year 2021.
Yeah, I resonate so much with what folks have said. And I think growing up, I didn't see almost anybody that was not white represented as gay or as trans or anywhere in the vast umbrella of our community. And I think for a long time that made me believe that I could not even be queer trans, you know, because there was like so little representation. Queerness, and especially in my family, coming from an immigrant Filipino family, queerness was seen as like a Western thing. It was seen as an American thing or a white privileged thing. And so I am grateful that now, because of social media and because even mainstream media, there are more representations of intersectional queer and trans identities. And it's still not enough. There are still ways that those narratives are really, really specific. They don't speak to the broad range of experiences we have. They hyper-emphasize things like beauty. Queer and trans people should not have to be beautiful to be valuable, to be worthwhile, to be safe. And I think that's another thing that I think is one of the dangers of as trans people become more visible in the mainstream. The stereotypes associated with trans people are then just different. We are not freed of them. They become different. And that's the thing that I'm keeping my eye on as a young trans non-binary person that's working with other young trans and non-binary people, ensuring that they have the space to connect with their truest self, with their own self-worth and their own self-value, not dictated on the like beautiful and aesthetic people they see on the various screens they're on every day. And it's something I struggle with, you know? Growing up, so much of the representation of queer people was like hot, thin, light skin, like you dress really well, you have a new outfit every week. I don't have money to buy a new outfit every week. I'm wearing the same clothes for 10 years. Let me tell you, like, I don't know where all these people are getting clothes to take their photos. I can't do that. And I think that's like one of the realities that we have to deal with, that a lot of the representation is still unattainable to most people in the trans and non-binary and queer community for reasons that are also rooted in transphobia and homophobia. Our folks can't get jobs that allow them to pay for a new outfit every week or to get surgeries in ways that leave their bodies traditionally beautiful. You know, there's a lot of barriers that are only reinforced by the Hollywood stereotypes or the ways that Hollywood cherry picks certain trans people to uplift and leaves the rest of us questioning our worth. And so that's the thing that I think I would really, really just emphasize for our folks, that as we become more visible, don't allow that to be the only representation with which you measure your value. Because trans folks, regardless of how we look, regardless of the clothes we wear, the makeup we put on our faces, the surgeries that we do or don't get with our bodies, are valid and are worthy, not to be measured by beauty alone.
I think I want to add on to Sammy's beautiful point that was said of first, like physical representation of queer people on TV, but also the storytelling process. I think as I grew up, as I mostly saw, if there was a gay character on TV, usually white, cis, chiseled, you know, in that like physical sense, but like their personality was literally described as just being gay. And like, you know, just like those like little personality traits that you would just see, and how this like contorted people's imagery of, oh, this is what a gay person is supposed to look like. And so, you know, this consistent like microscoping of people's like gender and sexuality on TV negatively affects the community. I think, you know, like it's not only about like representation, but proper representation. So I'm calling out like Hollywood on like, I can clearly tell when a non-queer person wrote the story because of how just chemical everything comes out. So there needs to be more proper storytelling and more proper representation of people's experiences. And of course, it's difficult with, you know, how vast the media is, but it's possible. I'm not going to say it's impossible because Hollywood has the resources, but they just need to get out of their heads in the sense of how a story is told and how people are represented properly in the story so that young queer people can see themselves on TV and also start these conversations at the dinner table and between their friends, because everyone talks about what they see on the media and what they see on TV. It's how people, break bread and sometimes how we're introduced to queerness. That's how I was introduced to the LGBTQ plus communities. It was on TV. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, in a hyper Somali Muslim community, and that was beautiful, but queerness was not apparent whatsoever. I was like, when I first saw, I think it was Queer as Folk, I think that was like the first time I really saw queer representation on TV. I was like, oh, people can do that? That's crazy. I didn't know that.
I mean, I do have to shout out Margaret Cho, because Margaret Cho was sort of the first, she was just who she was, and she just told you real. I have a real respect for comedians like now Bowen Yang and Joel Kim Booster, but that's it. There's not many, but also Drag Race, like what RuPaul has done, for better or for worse, created this kind of competition in that, drag is a thing now, and has, brought out the real, humanity stories in the as well as a reality TV show can do when you're trying to all vie for a certain grand prize. I mean, as a drag queen myself, I think our community is part of the leaders of this LGBTQ community, but also people who bring in others. Like, I think drag queens are always about building community. And so I'm thankful for Drag Race as a representation. I mean, that's where you can see fat femme people like Kimchi, like Eureka. And then you can see real people who live real lives, after they met at Win, and they're coming back, but they're living their truths, and they're around the country. So being advocates for our community.
Michael, how dare you not bring up the name Jiggly Caliente?
Can I call you Jiggly? Is that
right? Yes. I love that, and I think that RuPaul's Drag Race is a perfect example of something that has evolved, because as the trans community knows, it was problematic for a while, the way that trans people were talked about, the way the audition process went, and with the inclusion of trans folks from the get-go in the casting process, I really hope that goes a long way into introducing a wide swath of America to a part of the trans community. I mean, I don't know how many of you were watching this past season, but Gottmik is a wonderful person, in my opinion, who has, I think, done a lot to introduce what it is, for that particular trans story. So shout out to Evolving.
Yeah, shout out to Evolving. And also, to add to Yakub's point about needing more representation, I do think, these storytellers or creative types or showrunners, there just needs to be more writers. So if you are watching this and you have a story to tell, just write it down and be a creative, and go forth. And there's, with the social media and YouTube, you can create video production that eventually becomes amazing TV. So this is not new. So go out and tell our stories, because we need that.
Our time is going by so fast today. We've talked about a lot of serious subjects and some fun ones. I want to end on this note. I want each of you to tell me what you love about being you and as a part of your particular community. I want to start with Aria.
Yeah, I think as a Black trans woman, and I want Black trans women who may be watching this to know, we are the most beautiful people in the world. And we are more powerful than our minds can digest. And I think that is what is so amazing about this time right now. And being transgender and being authentically myself was one of the, some of the best moments of my life. And to be a part of such a beautiful community and watch the rest of pop culture emulate us. Yes, honey, and all that all comes from us. There are ways that, as trans people, we have contributed greatly to popular culture and not been credited, from the ballroom scene to all these different subcultures that we hold, and nightlife, and all the things. And I just want as we celebrate Pride for trans people and specifically Black trans people to be celebrated for us existing and then informing the culture. And I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yakub, what is your joy?
Oh, that is a good question. Something so interesting. I have recently just decided to live life really joyously, in the sense that I think happiness is momentary. You get moments of happy, but you can always keep your joy at the end of the day. You can have a joyous mindset and always strive for, seeking better and also celebrating yourself. I think time and time again in my life, I have been told that I should not be as I am, or I should not exist in the spaces that I am, but clearly sharing space with these beautiful, amazing activists right here, I'm reminded that I deserve to be here and I deserve to be celebrated. Black, brown, POC, LGBTQ plus people are an amazing existence in this world, and we deserve to celebrate ourselves and be celebrated, and love ourselves in its complete fullness. And also forgive ourselves and give ourselves the capacity for growth and process the trauma that we consistently live in, and that we've gone through, that our ancestors have gone through. So my joy is an everyday struggle, and I ask everyone to, seek life and live joyously. As Michael said, share your story if you are in a space and capacity to. If not, someone will hear it and someone will celebrate and, share the joy that, you deserve to.
And for God's sake, don't be so hard on yourself. By the way, that's a note from myself to myself. And Michael, how about you?
Things that bring me joy is just simple things like music, simple things like enjoying a beautiful warm day. And I think that's what Pride has a lot of time. This is music, warmth, love, community. I'm speaking now directly to maybe a queer Asian person who is working in a job that they may not like, but just kind of trudging along and trying to, why is what, doesn't feel anything. Here's the thing. If you make real things make meaning in your life, then it becomes meaningful. And so you have to choose to make it meaningful. And gratitude is a practice. And joy, recognizing joy, reclaiming your joy in a world that it takes it away from you is a practice. Like take that joy, okay? And then build solidarity with the others who may be different from you. Recognize that, maybe as a cis gay man, that my liberation is tied to the liberation of trans folks. And so until trans folks are liberated, then we are not liberated. As an Asian person, my liberation is tied to Black folks. And so if, Black folks are not liberated, and then none of us are. So just feeling that, and reclaiming the joy when you feel that warmth on your face and you're listening to the music and enjoying your Pride. So that's what I really enjoy for Pride.
Michael, that brought me joy. And the last word is going to go to Sammy.
Yeah, wow, what an honor. Thanks so much, everyone, for this conversation today. I think that I say this often, and I'll say it again, being queer and being trans is one of the biggest gifts I've ever received, because I think it has freed me from living a life of stale and sad expectation. There's been a lot of expectation put on me throughout my life that I have to live a certain way, I need to progress a certain way, I need to look a certain way, I need to surround myself with certain people. And being queer and being trans has allowed me to return to me, first and foremost, and build my life in abundance and interdependence following that. And that is where I receive my joy. When I get to live as my fullest self, despite all the hardship and the violence and the sadness and the stress, at the end of the day, I am choosing my authenticity, and I have been blessed with gifts every time I choose that. And that is the thing that I always root in whenever the hardship comes up, that I live a life of agency. And I'm so, so thankful and joyful and happy that I get to live that life, because it has brought me just the most amazing people and circumstances and conversations like this one. So thank you all.
Sammy, I could cry after that, and from all of you talking about that, but I'm not going to, because I have another paragraph to read in the teleprompter. Thank you for joining our ABC7 Next Gen Now conversation. Go to our Take Action page to learn more about resources to support our LGBTQ plus communities. And now, one final word before we go. Last weekend, I was having breakfast at a San Francisco restaurant, and a man came up to me to tell me that he said that he enjoyed watching me on the news. He told me that he was about to turn 70 years old, and that as a young man, he never would have dreamed that someone like me, an out gay man, would be a TV anchor. That made me feel good. It also made me feel bad, because certainly LGBTQ folks have always done this job, and every job, but they couldn't safely tell others who they really were. Today, as I talk to these young leaders in this chat, I realize that not too many years from now, I will be approaching one of them, marveling at the reality they have created that I did not even imagine that they could have in my prime. So one day, if an older gentleman approaches you and your friends at brunch to marvel at what you have done, smile, nod, and take a moment to be proud. Thanks for joining us today.